guidance. Thank you. So that parents can enjoy their journey of parenthood and bring up children who are resilient and who are confident. So we are 20 years old. That's Parenting Matters has been in operation since 2004. And we work with parents across age groups, right from expectant parents to parents of teenagers. And we do this through a variety of offerings from courses. Our flagship course, Being Your Child's Life Coach, is like a really well developed and well sought after course. We do workshops and talks, we do newsletters, we do one on one counseling, and we run sessions with subject matter experts like the one which you're attending today. Also, one thing I'd like to mention is that we've been working with parents at an individual level. We've been working with parents through schools, through business organizations, and also proud to say that last 3 years we've been partnering with NGOs through the government and CSR initiatives and taking parent education to under-resourced localities, especially in North Chennai. So if you would wish to read more about our work, you can check out our website or follow us on our social media platforms. But that was like just a short introduction of Parenting Matters. I'm very happy to welcome Maya. Maya Thiagarajan heads Tree, and she and her team have put together this lovely session, an informative session. And I will hand over to Maya to introduce the topic and a little bit about Tree as well. Maya.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Prerna. And I'm excited to see everyone here. Thank you all for joining us. So I'll just start by telling you a bit about Tree. Here we are. So Tree is really about teachers and supporting teachers. I was an educator, a classroom teacher for many years. And I started working as a teacher educator, as a teacher trainer. So at Tree, we do a number of things. We have, courses for teachers. We recruit teachers. So anybody who is interested in teaching, or if you know anyone interested in teaching, any aspiring teachers, please connect with us because we are always looking for talented teachers. And we can place teachers in schools, train them as needed. We also have a robust teacher community where we plan events for teachers to come together and discuss issues in education. And for parents specifically, we have a Tutor Connect program where many of the teachers in our database want to do tutoring on the side. So we connect teachers and students who are looking for a tutor. So if you're looking for a tutor for your child, you can also get in touch with us. So that's just a little bit about Tree. I'm excited to get started. Prerna and I will be discussing, making choices for your child as the child gets ready for high school, which is, of course, a stressful and exciting time, I think. Yeah.
Yes, Maya. So actually, that's the first question I'd like to ask you. What are some of the key factors, which a parent should consider thinking about high school and their children? And at that time, children are teenagers. So before we even launch into which board and all, what are some of the factors?
Yeah, and I think one thing is to just remember that for students, high school is a hard time. It's a stressful time, and not just for students, but for parents as well. Because I think parents start to feel like the stakes are high. They start to get emotionally stressed if the child is struggling in any way, right? So just to remember and have empathy for the fact that your child is going through a lot of changes. It is physically, cognitively, emotionally, in every way, there are all kinds of changes happening in the child's body and mind. Also, the way our system is structured, for better or for worse, in grades 10 and 12, we have these massive exams that feel very high stakes. Teachers are putting pressure, the peer group puts some pressure on kids and parents. I think if parents can lower the pressure a little bit, that's probably the best way to go, because society puts so much pressure at this stage. And then this particular generation, of course, has a ton of distractions that they have to manage while they're going through all of this with all the social media. So I think just thinking about and having empathy for what your child is going through and dealing with is really important as you start thinking about high school. Yeah.
No, you put it so well. It's a difficult time for both parents and children because, career, getting into a good college, and it's a make or break
Yes.
situation. So parents are driven by the worry of the future. And children, of course, have their own preoccupations and changes which they are dealing with. So,
Yeah. But
absolutely.
I, when you say make or break, I think that's how everyone feels. But I don't know if anything in life is really make or break. Like I feel like we feel that way when kids get into grade 10 and 12, right? And therefore we put all this pressure on them because we're also feeling that pressure. But I think there are always, I've seen lots of resilient kids and kids who navigate things that things don't work out, but they still do really well in the long run. So I think reminding yourself as a parent that a lot of this pressure is coming from us, but in the long run, things will work out,
Yes, and actually,
that does
such
help.
sessions, the one we are holding now, is
Yes.
key because then when you have information, you can actually, work on your
Yes.
fears. Because without information, your mind can just
Spiral a bit.
catapult you into the, dominant way of thinking that this is make or break. This is going to
Yes.
be so hard.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly. Exactly.
absolutely. Yes. So, so then, what do we, what can we do as far as school is concerned? Yes. Oh, great.
Yeah. So I'm going to just share two different ways of thinking about school for high school. I think most parents are thinking in terms of the academic part, but I want to say that the emotional part is also really important for students because um, providing a stable sort of home environment, friendships, because what happens is if a child has a lot of issues on the social, emotional side, then their academics will get affected, right? So I think as parents, our biggest job is to just try to be that stable, emotionally calm space, provide that for kids. So that they can get through this turbulent phase of life. So really thinking about a school that will be supportive, that gives them different leadership opportunities. One thing I think that's really important about high school is it's a time also for a child to start discovering who they are, because that's when I think up till middle school, you're doing a little bit of everything. And then in high school, you have to start making these choices about subjects and things. So really paying attention to what does your child love? What are your child's strengths? And trying to help your child understand themselves. Because I think one thing I would advise parents to do is not come in with a preconceived notion that my child has to be an engineer, my child has to go to medical school, but really kind of look at your child and say, well, what would make that child happy in the long run? What are their strengths? What kinds of career options would work for a child with these strengths? So helping the child discover herself or himself. um, and then of course sleep, very important. Sports, exercise, nature, just really taking care of mental health and physical health. I think this generation particularly, mental health is a big issue in high school. So we want to help them with that, managing that. Now, on the other side, when you're looking at schools, if you're trying to choose a school for high school, your teachers are a very, very important part of the decision. So a school with teachers who know what they're teaching, know the curriculum, and are comfortable with what they're teaching, that makes a big difference. I think something that's very new and experimental is risky in the high school stage. Um, and parents sometimes ask me, should I go for an academic school or a holistic school? And I feel like it always has to be both. It's not either or. You need a strong, academically strong school, but also a school where kids will have opportunities for leadership and extracurriculars and understand themselves. Because that whole well-roundedness in high school is also important. It's important for getting into colleges. It's important for them to understand themselves, and it's important for physical and mental health. They'll actually do better in their exams if they're overall healthy and doing sports and doing other activities as well. So I think just as parents, before we get into boards and colleges specifically, just keeping all this in mind is really important. Just having the big picture in mind, and when you get really anxious, being able to step back and kind of come back to that big picture and say, things will work out. And I do want to think of the whole child, not just has to get this marks, has to get in here. So, yeah.
Maya, in fact, I work with parents every day, and I cannot stress more on this emotional stability aspect. Because
Yes.
when children are emotionally stable, there's also a time of turbulence for them during their teenagehood. Very aptly put by a psychologist I was talking to, that for those of you who stay in Chennai, that teenage brain is like, Gemini circle at peak or traffic time. There's just so many things happening there. And that
Yes,
steadiness which they get in their homes goes a long way, because when they feel safe and connected is
yes,
when the learning really happens. They're not fighting for survival. The self-esteem is intact and they believe in themselves. So
yeah,
I think that is important both in school and at home.
yeah,
Absolutely.
hugely. And they may not always, we have to provide that stability. They may have their meltdowns and their, you know, stresses and everything else because they're teenagers. But I think for us as adults to be that calm space and provide that calm space is really important.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So yes, please go ahead.
So one of the things that we were going to talk about is just different boards. And before we get into boards, I mean, Prerna, you can ask, about the different boards. But before we do that, I wanted to just talk about one big thing as we think about boards. And that is just the idea of how assessments drive our system. That what gets tested gets taught. If things are not tested and measured, they tend to be the things that are sidelined and forgotten. So your sports will be taken away for math, things like that. Like the priorities are what is going to be tested in these big board exams in high school. And even if a system says, oh, we value creativity, if their assessments are very close-ended, then that's what's going to be taught. So it's really about the assessments, I think, when we're thinking about what each board does, how are they assessing, and that drives everything. So it's a sort of working backwards.
Mm.
So yeah,
Oh, that gives a very clear picture when we want to make choices for our children.
yes,
What's being tested, and hence what is the priority of the institution we're putting our child.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly,
And
exactly.
maybe it also gives clues to us as parents, where's the lacuna and where do we need to step in that
Yes,
case then, because
yes,
not that everything which is tested is only required in life, right? It has to
yeah,
be so much
yeah,
more holistic.
yeah. And certainly we can, if we know that the testing is very, in one unidirectional, we can supplement in other ways. Um,
So, Maya, I wanted to move on to the boards, because
yeah.
a lot of parents whose children are in middle school or
Mm,
entering high school are always confused. Which
right,
board will align to their child's future aspirations? So, can we just kind of first start with our boards we know, which have been
right,
in India forever and ever, like an ICSE or CBSE,
yeah,
and then maybe if you could tell us a little bit about the newer boards. I mean, not no longer newer now, but historically newer,
right.
so that we kind of get a comprehensive picture of how these boards help our children get
Yeah.
ready for the future. Yeah.
Sure, sure. So let's start, like you said, with ICSE and CBSE. And I'm going to just start by thinking about what are the advantages and disadvantages of these boards. I think the biggest advantage is that they are familiar. So people know what they're all about. And also that our teachers are very equipped to teach these boards. So they've been through these systems, they know how to teach it. And so it's a kind of established system. So it's not experimental for our teachers, teachers in Chennai, teachers in India, across the country. Um, so in that sense, I think that makes a big difference. Actually, you have teachers who know what they're doing. Um, uh, they tend to have very structured curricula, and I've been reading a lot. There are a lot of changes in the CBSE. I was just reading an article on changes in the ISC and ICSC curricula. But like I said, the reason I prefaced all this with the assessment slide is because until the assessments are changed, everything is still abstract. It's when the assessment changes that the whole system will start to change based on that assessment. So when we start seeing more creative, open-ended assessments, or we start seeing, research projects that really require kids to do actual research where they have to make an argument, come up with a research question, cite their sources, real research, not just like the kinds of projects that our systems have right now don't really require 21st century research skills as they should. So I would say at this point, these systems, they're trying to move in the right direction in terms of 21st century skills, but until the assessments are really changed a bit. And that's a difficult thing to do, because then you also have to think about how you're grading those assessments, how we're training teachers to teach them, to teach for that. So I think there's still a while before all of that will happen. But, as we know, it's a content heavy curriculum, lots of information. The textbooks, the assessments are fairly predictable. There's less emphasis on project-based skills, presentations, analysis and research, although the systems are saying that they want to change that for sure. So that's just a little bit. I think, these boards work really well if you know your child wants to do engineering in Indian school, in an Indian college, or even medical school. I think the Indian boards work well because they're kind of aligned with these professional pathways. You can combine them with your extra coaching sessions on the side, and it is easier to score. You get your grades on time. For it's all aligned on that same calendar schedule also. So I would say definitely, if you are thinking that your child wants to do medical school or engineering in India, I would actually go with a CBSE or an ISC board. I just feel like it's all
Tried and
aligned.
tested and
Yeah,
well-beaten path.
yeah, and that those are kind of sort of stressful pathways. So if you do a system that everyone knows what they're doing and it's a little familiar, it's a little easier than trying to do it via the IB, or a newer system. So yeah.
And what about the IGCSE and IB? And I really like the way you're also giving what future careers would align
Yes.
with them. So
Yes.
please, if you could shed light on that.
Sure. Sure. So just so that parents know, IGCSEs are for grades 9 and 10. It's kind of like what's used to be the O levels in England. And it's like a 9th, 10th grade curriculum where you take your board exams in grade 10. Okay. Either in February, March, or you can take it in May, June. So they have 2 different times for the exams. And they have a whole range of subjects, so you can choose. Most kids will do like 7 or 8 subjects, so it's quite a large number of subjects. One interesting thing about the IGCSE is most schools will offer this combined science curriculum. They call it coordinated sciences. And then they also have subjects like global perspectives, which require quite a lot of research, things like that. After they'd finish the grade 10 IGCSE, kids will go into the A levels. That's how the Cambridge program is designed. So they would go into A levels, and sometimes students may want to do a course just for 1 year. So it's kind of like half of an A level, in which case it's called the AS level. So they do the AS level at the end of grade 11. So you might you might say, okay, I want to have at least 1 more year of math. So I'll do AS level math, but I don't want to do the full A levels math, and because it's really tough. So that way you can do a couple of these sort of 11th grade courses, and then
That's like a more basic course than an advanced course.
yeah. So the A level actually stands for advanced level.
Ah,
So AS level is sort of you do the exam at the end of grade 11. So it's half of the A level course in a way, or an easier version of that A level course.
and
So
how does that help them in college, as in just to keep in touch with the subject?
yeah, so if you're if you're looking at applying, say, to a liberal arts curriculum or going to the US for college, most competitive colleges in the US will say we require 4 years of math in high school, 4 years of English, 4 years of at least 3 years of a science, at least things like 3 years of a second language. So if a child, say, is not really good at math, they don't want to do math at A level, but they're like, okay, I don't want to show that I've dropped math after grade 10. They might do AS level math or AS level English, just to to show that they've done it through 3 years of high school. So I think, especially if you're going to the US or for a liberal arts curriculum, thinking about those extra AS levels can be quite helpful. Um, you have to do a minimum of 3 A levels, and many students do 4. So you could do 3 A levels and 2 AS levels, or something like that. So you're doing 5 courses in grade 11 and then only 3 in grade 12, or 4 courses in grade 11, only 3 in grade 12, something like that. So that's just an option. also, I guess if you start a course and find it really hard, you could just finish it in grade 11 instead of doing the whole 2 years. So that just gives you
So it gives a flexibility.
There's some flexibility in the system. Yeah, exactly. And it definitely, if you're thinking of going to a US college that requires at least 3 years of math, at least 3 years of English, you can do the AS level instead of the whole 4 years if you need to. So, so that just gives you a bit about the structure of the program. I think, I'm quite biased towards the Cambridge IGCSE and A levels because I feel like it's a nice in-between between the Indian curricula and the IB, because it's still quite structured. And it's a little easier for teachers here to get their heads around because it has a lot more similarities to an Indian curriculum. It's more textbooks, the assessments are easier to teach too, I think, in a way. So it's I think, a very solid curriculum for any kind of career. The one thing you'd have to think about with your kids, not, as they're making subject choices, is what does the college require? Because if you're only doing 3 A levels or 4 A levels, then you want to make sure that you're covering the subjects that would be required for your college entrance, so that's important to look at. I would say for the IGCSE curriculum, it's better to just make sure your child does English, does math, does at least one humanities, does coordinated sciences or 2 individual sciences, so that they're getting a broad base, because then you're not shutting down any options. You don't want to shut down options too early before a child has really experienced, it's good for them to have that broad base and then make decisions after grade 10 is what I would say. Yeah. So that's a little bit about the IGCSE A levels.
I think we're just left with the IB board now, because lots of questions coming in. So let's finish the boards and then we can.
And then we can take some questions. Yeah. So, yeah, like I said, the IGCSE A levels is a sort of in between. They do have coursework and research options in the exams. The Global Perspectives course requires a lot of research skills, but it's still fairly straightforward. It's still quite structured and not too difficult for teachers here to get their heads around. So the IB continuum, parents are probably familiar with. In the primary years, it's called PYP. In the middle years, it's MYP through grade 10. And then the DP is the diploma program in grades 11 and 12. And that's really what I'm going to talk about today. The IB diploma program is in some ways, it's a fantastic program, and in some ways, I feel it's quite a flawed program. It's got a little of both. So students will it's a 2-year program. You start in grade 11 and finish by grade 12. So they'll take their exams at the end of grade 12. It's an extremely rigorous program. It actually started out as a program for gifted kids, with this goal of providing a very 21st century skills-based and very international curricula. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about it, just so you can. So first of all, it's a very holistic program in the sense that, unlike going into a science stream or a commerce stream or an art stream, which is what you do for ICSE, CBSE, and even for A levels, if you want to go to medical school, you will do your biology, chemistry, physics, and maybe maths. So you'll be doing A level, you'll be choosing your A level subjects based on what you're going to be applying for in college. Because in both the UK and India, everything is sort of tracked this way. But the IB says, no, we want kids to have a very holistic, it's like a liberal arts program for high school, for 11th and 12th. You have to do 6 subjects. Of those 6 subjects, you have to do English, you have to do a second language, you have to do math, you have to do at least 1 science, at least 1 humanities, and then the 6th one is sort of up for you to decide if you want to do a second humanities or a second science. But the thing is, you can't do all 3 sciences, or at least it's very difficult. There are some students who can kind of petition and have an exception to do 3 sciences if they want to go to med school, but the IB is not designed for 3 sciences. So that's something to keep in mind. It requires the sort of broad base, where you're doing all these different subjects. 3 of them are done at a higher level, 3 at a standard level. But even the standard level is quite tough, actually. There are a lot of other requirements for the full IB program. You have to do an extended research paper called an extended essay, which you come up with the question yourself. So you can choose any subject you're passionate about, and you come up with the question and work with a teacher at your school who will be an advisor, and then write this whole essay. And it's the whole process. They're very particular about how you format it, the argument, the citations, everything, the sources, all of that. There's a required philosophy course called Theory of Knowledge, and students have to write papers or essays. They'll get questions like, is there such a thing as an absolute morality, or is everything relative? Is right or wrong always relative? And then kids have to do a little bit of research and thinking, and and write these essays. So
It's
very
very far away from your rote learning and
Yes,
stuff. It's
totally
more
very
about
far away. Yes, exactly. Even your actual subjects, every subject has a pretty large component devoted to research. So, for example, if you're doing biology, even at the standard level, you have to set up your own experiment. So you have to come up with the experiment, you have to come up with your hypothesis, how you're going to test it, you have to document the whole thing. It may be an experiment that takes a full semester to do. You might be growing your own viruses or whatever it is, and then documenting it and showing your results and presenting everything. So it's very intense in terms of the research component. And this is now, it's in some ways it's a fabulous program because it is intellectually very, very rich,
stimulating.
but it's also really tough. And it's because the assessments are so open-ended, it becomes very hard to grade them objectively.
Mm.
You don't have the kinds of mark schemes that you have for A levels or ICSE, ISC. So for example, if you're doing English, they'll ask you these, they have a whole range of texts that you can study. So the teachers have a lot of freedom. And then they ask you a very open-ended question where they say, using 2 of the texts you've studied, write an essay about how literature can be used for protest or something like that. But it's because it's so open-ended, the mark schemes are also quite open-ended. So there's a lot of subjectivity in the grading, which I think can be very frustrating for teachers. They don't know what exactly the IB is looking for, what the examiner is looking for. So I think there is, the marking and grading, the subjectivity element is problematic, and just the level of rigor can be overwhelming for a lot of kids. So those are just things to keep in mind.
So
And just
Maya,
yeah,
sorry, please go on.
no, go ahead, ask.
No, I was wondering the way you're kind of you've laid out what the IBDP is. What
Yeah,
kind of students or what kind of families would then choose to send their children to this kind of curriculum? What's the
exactly.
advantage? Yeah.
Yeah, so there are advantages, I think. It's the advantage is you're really preparing your kids to, they're well prepared with 21st century skills, because there's a lot of thinking, there's a lot of independent thinking. You have to come up with questions, you have to design stuff, you have to, so it's very creative, a lot of critical thinking, a lot of analysis, a lot of research. So when they get to, they really have the skills they need to do things that you need to do in today's world. So in that
Mm.
sense, and it's intellectually interesting and exciting and well-rounded. So I feel like I'm just pointing out also the global failure rate for the IB for the full IB diploma is about 30%. So only about 70% of kids actually earn the full diploma. Um, so it I'm going to just share my next slide, because when is the IB the right choice? It's very good preparation for liberal arts schools. Liberal arts schools love the IB because it does give them this kind of holistic liberal arts foundation. And when kids do the IB and then they go to college in the US, for example, or Ashoka or something like that, they usually feel very well prepared.
Mm.
They feel like and the IB, you actually get credits at US colleges. So you could graduate a semester early, maybe, so you save a lot of money in that sense, because it's counted as college credits. Your higher level courses will be counted as college courses. So in the US. So in that sense, it's very good preparation. If you have a kid who's highly motivated academically, who really wants an intellectual curriculum, who wants to be able to ask questions and do their own research, this is a great program for them. Yeah, so, I think it is a wonderful program, but it's people who think it, I think sometimes people have this idea that, oh, it's a holistic program, so therefore it must be easy. It is actually a really hard program for kids, so that's just something to keep in mind, actually. It's
So
not impossible, but
there's
it's
a
hard.
question very related to the IB and the Cambridge curriculums is what is the cost of these programs? As in, are they also then the fees and the schools
Yeah.
then charge higher? Because of course it involves so much more training,
Yes.
teacher training and
Yes,
um,
yes. And more like to be an IB World School, to be licensed by the IB, they send people to actually visit your school. You have to have, a certain level of labs, and you have to have a certain kind of library with the resources and technology so that the kids can do all of this research. So actually, it's an expensive program to run for schools. And of course, that cost is passed on to the parents. So for sure, I would say when we're from a cost perspective, the Indian boards are definitely the most cost effective, then the IGCSE A-level boards, and then the most expensive would be the IB. I think, for a school to run. Even
yeah.
A-levels can be quite expensive for a school to run. So the cost will be passed on to parents. Yeah. Um, yeah, so that's a little bit about, so I'm going to just talk about when the IB is not the right choice.
Mm,
Because, I would say if you want your child to do medicine or engineering in India, Indian boards are probably easier. If you feel like, no, my child should have a more analytical, sort of research oriented preparation for the world, but I still want them to do engineering, I would say A levels is probably easier. Now,
mhm,
surprisingly, we don't have that many A level schools, although now they're starting. In Chennai, for example, many of the traditional ICSE, ISC schools are now moving into Cambridge IGCSE A levels. So I think depending on the age of your child, you will have more A level options in Chennai down the road. Up till now, it's really been, APL has been A levels, but we haven't had that many A level options here. But I think it's a board that there will be more options in the future. Um, so I would say the IB is not a good choice for med school or engineering in India because it's really difficult, and the child has to do a humanities, has to do, which I'm very pro doing all of that. But if you know your child is trying to prepare for the NEET or some
mm.
sort of IIT exam, and then combining that with IB is really hard. It's not impossible. I know kids
A lot of pressure.
but it's a
Mm,
lot of additional pressure. Right, exactly. And for law school, I actually feel the IB is really good preparation, but unfortunately, the IB results come out quite late. They come out only usually in July. And by that time, many law schools have already expected you to, in India, to apply
apply.
national law school. You have to apply earlier than that. So unless and the IB is not going to change when they share results. So unless the Indian law schools are more flexible, I think it is something for parents to look at, the timeline, because you don't want your child to have to take a full year off just because of the timeline. So that's a little bit about, who the IB is right for and who it's not right for, um,
Yeah.
or when to make that choice as a
Yeah.
parent.
No, so one of the questions which frequently parents ask is that if their child does an IB curriculum or an A level thing,
Hmm.
so would what options do they have options in Indian colleges or would they be expected only to go abroad?
They have options in Indian colleges for sure. It's not that an Indian college will say no. So, for example, I know a student, a very good friend of my son's, who is in gosh, I'm forgetting the name, but a top medical school here, and he did the full IB. So
Okay.
it is absolutely possible. It's just more difficult, I
Mm.
think the A levels are easier. I know a lot of kids who do A levels and stay in India. But like I said, if you are absolutely sure of medicine or engineering or something in India, then the Indian syllabus is sort of the most aligned. It's the easiest option in a
Yeah.
way. But I would say either that or the A levels. If you've had a child in the international system and now you don't want to move them to IG to a CBSE school, then put them in A levels. It's a good in between, you know. So yeah. Not that the
So
IB is impossible. It's not. You can go from IB into Indian colleges. It's very good if you want to do liberal arts. So if you want to do Flame, Ashoka, Priya, any of these kinds of colleges in India, they will love the IB. They'll be very pro IB.
lots of information, and at the same time, a lot of questions were popping up. So,
Yes,
Maya, how about we take a few questions in
sure. Let's do that. Let me
chronological
just
order, and then
come
we can
out
come
of
back.
this. Yeah,
Yeah.
let's
And then
come
we can
out
come
of
back
this.
to some more questions I have.
Yeah, perfect,
Yeah.
perfect. I have to
Yeah.
just come into
So,
the chat so I can. Oh wow,
so
there is.
Rajesh is asking, I think this was when you were talking about the assessment part of it. Rajesh has a query that
Yeah.
how can parents look at an alternative pathway of evaluating their child's progress, because his child is in a system where formal examinations don't start till class 8. Do you have any
Hmm.
response for that?
Yeah. So I would say, if you're in a system where you don't have exams till class 8, the two big areas that you want to make sure your child is up to speed on are math and basic reading writing skills. The content part I'm not so worried about. Like, content kids can learn without a problem, but these skill based subjects, it's very hard if you have big holes in your foundations. So I would say for math, I would supplement. If your child is at a school that doesn't do exams through the middle school years, I would definitely supplement with some sort of structured math program where you get a clear sense of, okay, these are the gaps and that need to be fixed, so um you can gauge where the child needs help. And similarly, I just make sure that reading and writing skills are where they need to be. So I would kind of supplement in those two areas, or math particularly, um, because I don't worry so much about content. Kids will get the content and they can learn content, but these skills are very sequential. And if you have kind of foundations with holes in them, you have issues when you get to the high school. Yeah.
Rajesh, you want to say something? Or is your
Sorry,
hand?
is there time for a quick follow-up? The, do you want to take other questions, or is there time for a quick follow-up on
There are
this?
a lot of
Yeah, yeah.
questions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead quickly with the follow-up. Yes.
Okay, so I'll just keep it short. So, the fact that we've been grappling with the fact that they don't have assessments, and when assessments kicking so late, I'm quite glad that you said that maths is a focus and writing and all of that. So I'm glad we are doing that right.
Yeah.
But the key thing is when these assessments kick in late, how do we be sure which is the board that eventually we should be directing the children to, or nurturing the children's understanding of certain subjects so they can be finally channelized to a certain kind of board. That's really where we are grappling for right now. We're in
Yeah.
Hyderabad, we're thinking of shifting to Chennai,
Mm.
so these other dilemmas also along with it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I think the thing is you don't need exams for you to figure out a child's strengths in a way. You can kind of look at their interests, look at what they're excited about, look at their work, because the school probably has some sort of way of showing you their work and showing you what they're doing and their learning, displaying their learning. So I think trying to gauge, what are my child's interests, what are my child's strengths, what kind of a pathway would work for that child. I mean, those are the questions I would ask myself as a parent. Um, as I start thinking about high school options. One thing is, I have worked at schools, like when I was in Singapore, I worked at the United World College as a teacher, and we didn't have exams till grade 9. So in middle school, there were no exams. Uh, and a lot of parents used to get really worried. They're like, oh, will kids be able to deal with the stress of exams when they hit high school? And actually, most kids were fine. Like after the first
Yeah.
set, they kind of adapted and they were fine. So I think you don't have to worry too much that, oh, kids need lots of exams to be prepared for exams. They will be able to, do well in their exams in high school. The bigger thing is just exams can give you a sense of where the strengths, where the holes are in a child's math skills, for example, or how much do they really know or not know. So in that sense, I would say it's just supplementing a little bit in math and reading writing. But in terms of understanding their strengths and weaknesses, you can do that in other ways besides exams. You can kind of
Yeah. In fact, my children went to a school, they went to KFI, and there were no exams till class 8. And I noticed that they were so much more proactive. It was like a learning curve. Oh, their head was in the right space when they knew why they're being tested, how to prepare, and the marks don't determine my worth, but it's more about learning where I need to put in more effort. That cannot happen when you're 4 or 5, when you're that little, because your cognitive capacity is still developing. But in class 8, class 9, the children start gearing up and understanding these concepts.
And
So,
actually, as an educator, I would say to parents one thing, like a lot of parents, when a kid comes home, they'll say, "What did you get in your test?"
yeah.
But I would really say, try to ask more about what did you learn? What excites you? What interests you? What are you learning? So if the focus is on learning, how are you growing? Do you feel like you're being challenged? Like those kinds of questions shift the focus from just marks, marks, marks to actually the process of learning, which I think is really good for a child in terms of discovering themselves and enjoying learning, all of which are good, important long-term goals. So yeah.
And Maya, I would like to add, as a parent educator, so many parents will say, "Oh, 8 out of 10, where did you lose those 2 marks?"
Yeah.
Without worrying, without actually acknowledging you got those 8.
Yeah.
Because when we
Yeah.
focus on the strengths, children are more likely to, be
Yeah.
motivated and succeed
Yes.
than just
Yes.
what did I lose?
Yeah, yeah. And I think, and I'm saying this, but I know it's very hard to do because as a parent, I found it tough, is just trying to not be emotionally reactive in high school when kids bring marks home. If
Yeah.
they've done badly in a test, just reminding yourself it's not the end of the world, nothing is, because I think a lot of parents go into panic mode. So just reminding yourself to you're the calm space for that child. So if you're in panic mode, then they are in panic mode. And then if they start feeling like their worth hinges on their marks and exams and achievement, I always say, you don't want to be an achievement oriented parent. You want to be learning oriented. You want to be, I mean, that child is valuable regardless of their marks, right? And the kids need to know that. They shouldn't start feeling like, oh, it's all about the marks,
Yeah.
really.
And
So,
actually, high school is such a training ground because class 10 and 12 in India is like, you know, it's like these big years.
yeah,
But
yeah,
class 8 and 9 are preparation for 10th. But, I see that in 8th itself, parents start freaking out that if you're getting this in 8th, how will you do in 10th? But the
yeah,
whole concept is that you learn your learning style, how you study, what works for you. Are you a morning person? Are you an evening person? Do you study when there is, a group study lesson, or do you study more in your individual? Do you write and study? Do you read and study? Those are questions which you
yes,
discover, and
yes.
then you go into those big years. So,
Yeah, and I think really thinking as a parent, one thing to think about is how do you help your child, like Prerna said, learn study skills. So, for example, a lot of kids will just read their textbook and underline things. But there's lots of research that unless you're quizzing yourself or testing yourself in some way, you don't retain things. So just helping your child understand basic study skills, helping them organize their time and their space, um, like helping them come up with a study schedule for themselves. I think all of those things are useful for parents to do starting from grade 7 and 8 to kind of gear up for those high school years.
I
And
would say gear up for life, your life
yes,
skills.
gear up for life. Exactly. Exactly. How do you manage your time, your distractions? Um, and there's lots of information online about study skills. And in fact, I mean, one thing we could do, Prerna, might be interesting is a session on study skills because
Absolutely.
there's so much research on what works to help kids retain things, to help kids learn better,
Yeah.
that parents should know and should teach their kids as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, Maya, I'm going to thanks, Rajesh. I'm just going to go to the next question. And I know
Sure.
you've asked many more questions, so we'll come to that sequentially. So Raji is asking about this child who's neurodivergent and
Yeah.
presently in an IGCSE school, finding it
Yes.
challenging. What curriculum would you suggest her moving to? And I'd like to piggyback on this question. So the mainstream sometimes doesn't work for all children. Whether
Mm.
it's ICSE or IGCSE or IB or even, our plain old CBSE, there is children with learning difficulties or
Mm.
neurodivergence, or even they're into sports probably and they can't make it to classes. or they're having a hard time socially, you know, maybe they're facing some bullying or some kind of awkward situation at school. So in such situations, how can we approach it? And I'm just piggybacking, but please do answer Raji's question
Yeah,
as well.
yeah. So I'm going to give you a couple different options. So one is just, both in the IGCSE. So I'm just noticing also, this is just a clarification. Someone asked about the IGCSE, and is IGCSE and Cambridge both the same? IGCSE is an exam that is, the two boards that offer different versions of the IGCSE, Cambridge and edXL. But most schools in India do Cambridge. So Cambridge is the board that's usually used in India to administer IGCSE and A-level exams. It's like the company that administers these exams, basically, is Cambridge. But anyway, so coming back to the question of, neurodivergent child, for both the Cambridge IGCSE A levels, or even now with ICSE, in Indian boards, you can actually drop subjects. So there's some flexibility with subject choices. So one thing I would say is, if you know a child is really, really struggling, and you know, like I know, for example, a child who is in an ICSE school who's dropped math in 9th standard. I mean, I wouldn't recommend it ideally, because it, if your child can do it through grade 10, they should. But if it's really a struggle, I mean, it is an option. Even IGCSE, you can choose which courses you want. So then there's no course that you must do, so there's flexibility around that. Now, if you feel like the child is really struggling with the exam system and mainstream system, the other option would be to look at the NIOS, which is sort of more independent educational path, where you can register with the NIOS, you can take their exams, so you still get that high school credential, but at the same time you can kind of create your own learning pathway and your own based on your strengths and your interests. So I know, for example, a very, very talented photographer who works with us, who did the NIOS because he was severely dyslexic, wasn't coping in the regular system, but was, very talented in terms of the visual arts. And so did the NIOS and then went on to be very, very successful in the field of photography and filmmaking. So it's absolutely possible to do really interesting things through the NIOS. I actually know kids, say, if people are in Chennai, I know students who've left school because either for social reasons, social emotional reasons, or academic struggles, and then done, say, the A levels, but they've done it through a homeschooling route. So I think now there are many possibilities. There's the Quest Learning Center in Chennai. APL was actually started with the idea of being a space for kids who didn't fit into a traditional system and wanted flexibility or more customized programs. The NIOS exists. So there are these options for that alternative route all the way through grade 12. Yeah, I hope that answers the
That's so
question.
heartening to know, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know a lot of kids who do these alternative routes quite successfully. So you have to know your child and then make that decision.
Given the right environment, any child would prosper.
Yes.
So
Yeah. And you don't want to, I think one of the worst things we can do for parents is to make a child feel constantly incompetent, or, so capitalize on their strengths. If you know that the child really, this is just not working, the child is severely dyslexic or whatever the issue is, don't force them down a path where they're not going to be able to be successful.
yeah, and this is so relevant because when they are growing up, their brains are still developing and they're internalizing so much of this unsaid messages, of
Yes.
I'm not good enough, and that kind of rules them for life. So
Yes.
it's such a
Yes.
sensitive time which requires us to be more empathetic
Yeah.
while we're dealing with children.
Yes. And I think the thing as a parent is having, like, knowing your child, because you also don't want to let a child, like, if I would say, if a child can do math through grade 10, it's probably a good idea. So just because a child doesn't like it, or doesn't mean you just say, okay, drop it. But if you really feel like this is something that's not working for my kid and they're really struggling, it's impacting their health, the mental health, whatever, then be flexible,
Yeah.
so have
I,
those, yeah,
I
that
think I have
kind
a
of
personal
knowledge.
example of that because my son wanted to drop math, and I am such a math kind of person. So it's so
Mhm.
much of it is to do with our own belief systems.
Yes,
And sometimes we don't see our children with fresh eyes. It was a huge learning for me personally, and
yeah,
huge challenge for me to let go. And
yes,
my son did, of course, math till 10th, but 11th and 12th he didn't.
yeah, yeah.
And he's
No,
doing fine.
yeah,
So
exactly.
sometimes we're so fearful of what will happen. I think
Yeah.
we forget to see the present because we're so fearful of the future.
Yes.
So,
And this is what I mean, again, it's very easy to say, but I don't know if I do this myself as a parent. But if we can parent from a place of possibility, not fear,
yeah,
where we can feel like, yes, there are possibilities for our kids and we have faith that our kids will do fine in the long run, then it becomes a lot easier to work with them. But if everything's coming from a place of fear, then you're creating anxiety for yourself, for them. So really trying to let go of a little bit of that control and fear, I think is important, but really hard to do as a parent because we are all so entangled with our kids, So I know it's easy to say, hard to do.
actually, that is one of the very big things we discuss in our sessions. So
Yes,
much of our own belief systems and baggage come into the relationship, and
yes,
how to distinguish what's coming from our own
yes,
conditioning and
yes.
really look at our child as a person of their own.
Yeah, yeah, and that, I mean, I think high school is the beginning of that letting go where they become their
Yes,
own people, and we have to be
absolutely.
able to see them as their own person. They're not just a mini me, or they're going to fulfill my desires for this, that, or because I'm scared that there are no jobs, I've forced them into this track or that track. Really look at who they are and then see possibilities in that area.
So let's go to the next question. Prashant wants to know that child coming from Waldorf curriculum, what are the
Hmm.
possibilities in India for colleges?
Um,
Anything to
so,
shed light on that?
as far as I know, like most of the schools I know that do Waldorf really do it only through middle school.
Yeah.
I don't know any high schools that are Waldorf, uh, but maybe I'm not sure, but all the schools I know do Waldorf in the early years. So I think it would transition into probably any international school curriculum. If you wanted to go into IGCSE or A levels or something, probably Waldorf would. It is a much more alternative, curriculum. It's very interesting. Um, I would say the same thing I said to Rajesh about, probably supplementing for maths because Waldorf is also not big on testing and things like that. Um, so yeah, so supplementing for math and making sure they have those math skills and then seeing what their interests are, what their strengths are, and then I would say probably your best bet would be an IGCSE or an IB curriculum from Waldorf. Yeah.
Thank you, Maya. The next question is more on a policy level.
Mm.
Rajesh wants to know what are the implications of the NEP, the National Education Policy, on school level education?
Mm.
Is it overall in the right direction, or is there something we should be concerned about in terms of evolving complexities of choosing boards? Like, what's your opinion?
So I think the NEP is a really good document. I mean, I think it's it really stresses sort of the foundational years, foundational literacy and numeracy. It stresses teacher training. It stresses 21st century skills. So it's a very progressive document that's definitely going the right direction. My worry about the NEP is how many of our schools and teachers are equipped to actually implement what they're talking about. Because it's the very progressive academics who come up with this policy. And then when we look at what's happening on the ground, you know, how many of our teachers can do the things that the NEP would want schools across the country to be doing? That's really my question. But I do feel like it's moving in the right direction. And even the conversations happening with the CBSE boards, ICSE, ISC boards, I think are moving in the right direction. Because they are moving towards more research, more analysis, more creativity. But how that's going to translate into assessments, I don't know. And until the assessments change, the system doesn't change. But of course, like I was saying with the IB, part of the problem with these highly creative assessments is that they're very hard to grade in a very standardized format. They're hard to scale. Um, it's a little more difficult, So with our numbers in India, we'd have to see how they do it. Yeah.
So there's another question from, there's a very nice comment from Kamlasan. Thank you for that. It's about choosing the right career path and right school is more important than the curriculum itself. So keep the focus on, maybe the
Yes.
child's strengths and each school will kind of work out.
Mm.
But there's a question from Savita. What are some of the good Cambridge and IB schools available in Chennai?
So I will just, we work with all the schools in Chennai, so I don't want to comment on schools and evaluate them because they are all our tree works very closely with them. They're all our clients. But I'll just let you know the schools that exist. The most common format is Cambridge through grade 10 and then IBDP for grade 11 and 12. So you'll see that in, say, KC High, MCTM. Many of these schools will do Cambridge through grade 10, and then 11th and 12th will be IB diploma, and that sequencing works fine. Schools like Alphabet or Shivnadar, they are IB all the way through. So they do PYP, MYP, DP. So IB all the way through. APL is an A-level school, so does IGCSE and then moves into A-levels. And for a long time, it really was the only A-level choice. Now, I think Abacus, Sisha, and Harishri Vidyalayam are all starting A-levels as well. They're all going to be, so it's all in the beginning stages, but they're going to have both an ICSE. Sisha, for example, will have an ICSE stream and an IGCSE stream, and the IGCSE will move into A-levels. So a lot of these traditional schools are also now offering these international boards, and I think they're imagining that they will eventually maybe phase out the Indian board and move into IGCSE A-levels. So yes, so another good school is Sarvaloka in the, on OMR.
In Kelambakam.
Kelambakam, which does IGCSE, IB. I know we have a teacher here, Lena is here from Seed Academy, which is actually IGCSE and I think A-levels, right, Lena? I don't know if she's still there, but so we do have
Leena's here.
schools.
I'm here, ma'am. It's IGCSE and A level, ma'am.
A levels, yes. So Seed Academy is a
IAL.
good A level option also. So these are all the different, so we do have now more and more schools that are doing A levels as well. And I think that is, to me, it seems like a good option for Chennai to have those options. We also have the IB schools, and of course we have tons of our CBSE, ICSE schools as well. Although one thing I think is happening is your ICSE schools are all moving into IGCSE. So I don't know what will happen to ICSEs particularly. They are the board that is sort of kind of losing out the most to the international boards, I think, because a lot of ICSE parents are moving their kids into international boards. So I don't know about the future of that then, of ICSE schools in the city.
So Maya, we're already at 7:30 and there are some 2-3 questions. Shall we just take a quick 5-minute more thing and then wrap up? Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, so Nayantara is just saying that she did CLAT and was super competitive and she recommends IGCSE and ICSE.
Yes.
So she's speaking from experience. Thank you for that, Nayantara.
Yeah, and I would agree. Those are good options if you're going to do law school and CLAT, Yeah.
Rajesh, I'm going to skip your question and come back to it if we have time because we've already answered 2 of your questions. Prashant also. So Prashant is saying that if the child is doing Cambridge curriculum till 10th and then shifts to CBSE in 11th and 12th, do you think they'll be able to adapt?
I think it's going to be, I think it's easier to do the other way around. CBSE to Cambridge is a little easier than Cambridge to CBSE because a child who's been through Cambridge in the 10th and they're used to doing a lot of their own thinking and research. And then to move to a CBSE curriculum where they are often, many schools will say, you have to write it like this. It has to be done this way. They might find that shift quite difficult, because they are quite different. I think if you're moving from CBSE to Cambridge, sort of more restriction to more freedom is easier than the other way around. Does that make sense? If you give a kid a lot of freedom and then you restrict, it becomes harder than if you've restricted and then you open it up. So I think the other way around might be easier, I would say if your child has done Cambridge till 10th, your best bet will be to either continue with A levels or to go into IBDP. Now, nothing is impossible. kids can adapt if they have to, but my thinking is probably it's easier to do the A levels or IBDP route.
Okay, thank you. Kruti's thing is asking about her 2-year-old child, and I would request Kruti, if you can just write to Tree or give your email address here, we will mail you the link to the last talk Maya
Yes.
did, which was absolutely focused on this topic. So
Yes.
sorry, I'm going to skip your question for now. Namita is asking, what is the right age for a child with a Montessori foundation with strong math, reading, and writing skills to transition into a specific board?
Yeah. So I mean, if they've got strong skills, 5th grade, 8th grade, any, 3rd grade, 5th grade, 8th grade, wherever you feel like any time before 8th grade would be fine. Most of these Montessori, usually what I've seen is Montessori schools, they are very Montessori up till grade 8, and then suddenly the boards take over. So even if they are a Montessori school all the way through, somehow those board exam systems shift things in high school for sure. But if the child has strong math, reading, and writing, they'll do fine in any board when they transition, but any time before grade 8 probably.
Is there anything one needs to watch out for when the transition happens? I mean, any 1 or 2 things which you have like really, or
Yeah, I think from Montessori into a more traditional school. So it depends on what kind of school they're transitioning into. I think kids will probably adapt fine, because even if you're in a secondary environment for Montessori, if you're in, like, say, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, you're learning a lot of the same stuff that you'd be learning if you are in an IGC. So for example, I know Sprouts, they're Montessori, and then they kind of feed into APL for IGCSE A levels, and they've kind of combined Montessori almost with IGCSE by the time they get into the high school years, and it's quite a natural
children
transition.
really adapt. They really.
And the schools are thinking about it as well, so they do become, the Montessori environment that you have when you're age 6, 7 is very different from what you're going to have at age 11, 12, 13. So yeah.
I think the next question also has been answered, but Unnati is asking, can children who have done A levels in the Middle East adapt to education system in India for engineering or computer sciences?
Yeah, I think so. I think they can. I mean, definitely you can do the A levels, and then, while what I would say is, if you're going to send your child to engineering college in India, but you're doing A levels in, say, Dubai or Abu Dhabi or wherever, you'd still have to prepare the child for those entrance exams. So you'd have to prepare the child, which can be done with A levels. You can do just 3 A levels and then have extra time to prepare the child for the entrance exams, and there'll be some overlap in the materials. So definitely, as long as you can prepare the kid for the exams, they should be fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. I think I have covered all the questions. If I haven't and your question has been left out, you can write to Tree or to Parenting Matters, and we would be happy to
Yes.
answer. Maya, Tree website is www.treelearning.co.in, and your email address, maybe you can just say, Maya. So for
Sure. Yeah, it's maya@treelearning.co.in. So if you go on our website, you'll get all the information you need. We're happy to answer further questions via email if you have any.
Yeah.
And yeah, we would love to see parents get involved with Tree through, if you need a tutor, or if you're thinking of teaching, or someone who wants to teach. I mean, we definitely want to keep engaging with parents as well. And of course, Parenting Matters. I was thinking when you introduced the organization, Prerna, that parenting is the most difficult job and the most important job. And there is no training, or, people are just thrown in the deep end when you have that child. So it's
absolutely
really important to have an organization like Parenting Matters to support parents and kind of share all the research and that's out there, and also be a space to support, so it's really lovely that you have that.
Absolutely. But
Yeah.
lovely and very informative sessions and lovely audience.
Yes.
The chat window was buzzing with questions. I hope you've found your answers and it's been worth your while. From Tree and from Parenting Matters, we're really thankful for your presence, for your interest, and keep watching this space because we will come back with many more informative programs. You could also write into us if you're looking for something specific. Please do check out both the websites and we're here to support you.
Yes. Wonderful. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Prerna.
Thank you.
This recording will be available and be shared with all of you. The previous recordings also, I have messaged Kruti and Rajesh's emails. I've made a note.